Well, welcome to this chapter of our Spotlight on the Collection. My name is Lori Pickel-Stengel. I'm the director for the McLeod County Historical Museum, and we are here at the museum's historical gallery space. And I'm actually right in the entryway, and behind me you can see part of our 2016 theme, which is Fighting Fire, and it's the history of the McLeod County Volunteer Fire Departments. And this display here is focused particularly on two communities right now, Hutchinson and Glencoe, but actually we have displays that focus on all 8 communities in McLeod County. Now I say 8, don't get upset, I didn't forget that we have 9 communities, but unfortunately, only 8 of them actually organized and had an active, long-standing volunteer fire department. Biskie has, since their formation, relied on their neighbors, Glencoe and Hutchinson, and of course others around, whoever was available, depending on the severity of the fire, to help them in their firefighting services. And so for them, we are focusing on some of the major fires that happened in the Biskie area. Because although they didn't have a fire department, they did unfortunately have their fair share of disasters with fire. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about fire equipment and some of the things that have changed. At the Historical Society, we focus on the history. So our displays and a lot of our artifacts, and of course our new history booklet that's going to be coming out and will be available at this year's fair in August, focuses really on how did these departments develop over time and how did they change. And a big part of how they changed and how they developed dealt with some of the equipment that they used, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We have been trying to, in our monthly newsletter, look at each of the different communities, and this last month we looked at Lester Prairie and Brownton, so I've brought a few things and some photos that we'll show you from both of those communities as well. Talking a little bit about how these small rural communities fought fire. And back in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, it is a world of difference compared to today. And a big reason for that is the equipment. So massive fires a lot of times actually spurred these communities to even start to purchase fire equipment and later to even organize. Apparently, you know, it's one of those things, and I guess maybe human nature, if there's not a pressing need, maybe that's not a, you know, thing you feel you should be investing your time or your money into. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is we're going to this year look at some of the new fire stations that are around in the communities and also the old fire stations. And what I found in my research is that a lot of the fire stations started out as just a space carved out in community city halls. Winstead is a great example of 1886, massive Main Street fire. Guess what? By 1895-96, when they built their city hall, complete with a bell tower and space for their fire equipment, newly purchased after this massive fire, it really spurs on the need and the realization for a lot of these communities that we need to organize and pull something together so we are prepared. Communities purchased then equipment, but they didn't have fire chiefs like we think of today. That came later in the late 1890s and 1900s, so turn of the last century. A lot of times you see them refer to a person who takes care of the fire equipment that the city has purchased. So they've carved out this space in their city halls, and they have a person who's in charge of taking care of it, but they're not the fire chief. And many times they refer to them as the fire marshal. Now, Lester Prairie, will show you a picture of their early fire hall, and then also the fire hall that was in Brownton. Now, the one in Brownton is still there today. It was built in 1912, dedicated in January of 1913. And this space actually kind of you see as an impetus for having them develop an organized fire department. Because although they were organized by 1891 to a certain extent to have volunteers, they actually, until 1913, they were not, they didn't have a fire chief, they weren't drilling, but when this was built, they had a pump house housed within it. They had a bell, which was the common way that people would know that a fire was occurring and for everyone to come running, help with the fire. And it really was an all hands on deck kind of thing. There wasn't specific people with specific jobs on the fire engines or in charge of certain wagons or ladders. A big part of this was getting the equipment to where the fire was. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit here. One of the historical aspects for Broughton, we highlighted in our newsletter, and I'll just read you a little excerpt. And this is taken from the 1978 McLeod County History Booklet, which if you don't have that, you can look it up at our library, and it has information on the beginnings of a lot of the community fire departments, so it's really a great resource, or you can check it out and read it at the McLeod County Research Library. So, it says the first department was organized in 1891, and the equipment was all hand operated. The pumper took 8 of 10 men to operate, water being supplied from cisterns located at various intersections. And you see this at the Historical Society. We're really lucky. A lot of the fire departments have donated their minutes from their meetings once they organize. And you see just a development working with the city and the fire department of building cisterns. So you'll see in Broughton, 2 cisterns were built one year. Then the next year, 3 cisterns were built. And these were placed strategically throughout the community to make sure that water was accessible, because these hand pumps, and we'll show you a picture of what one of those looks like, they had to have close access to water. So as you might imagine, if you lived out in the country, unless you had a well close by, it was really, really tough. And until they started developing and getting some of the motorized water tankers, it was tough. And even in some of the small communities, and that's why there was a real push to put in these house pumps or cisterns all around. So it says here that Broughton was without the service of an organized department and depended on volunteers at the sound of the alarm. And the sound of the alarm was usually a bell. Most of these city halls had a bell tower, and that bell was what eventually got replaced by a siren, which eventually got replaced by telephones, which eventually got replaced by pagers, which now everybody, you know, has their computer in their pocket, and if you are on the fire department, you know when something's going on. So, so Broughton had really built up a lot of stuff around their community city hall, and was a big reason why by 1913 they had over 30 members on their fire department. And it was the first time that they started drilling, and it became really well organized. Lester Prairie and many of the other communities, not much different. And in our 1978 history, it says the early firefighting strength of the village of Lester Prairie was reliant on the Newstrom Milling Company, which was paid $1,500 for a 5-year contract to install a mill well and proper pumping equipment driven by their steam engine. Now, a little more research into this. I've talked to people and they said that actually this was almost like an early incentive for this company to come in and build their mill in Lester Prairie. And they kind of used this as a bargaining chip, and the fact that they needed this water to be available to put out fires. So, once the deal was struck, hose was purchased, but efficiency was questioned because the area protected was very small. And again, so anything around where the mill was, which is where the water was, go ahead, have a fire. You'll be okay probably. But the further you got out, away from that water source, if you can imagine these early pumps, they weren't very efficient, and it's unfortunate, but it says that, you know, the ladder and bucket trucks, which I can show you a picture here of, these early ladder, not trucks, I should say, wagons, if they were lucky to have horses on hand, which sometimes they ended up having to pull them by hand, like the old hose hand wagons. These were what was probably the most efficient. And it actually says in here, in 1881, the village purchased a hand-powered waterless fire engine and a hook and ladder truck with a dozen extra buckets. 8 men on the pump were required to produce a trickle from the hoses. The bucket brigade was considered the more effective tool for putting out fires. So here's a picture. It shows, gives you kind of an idea. It's not from McLeod County. I wish we had one, but I'm pretty sure that the last thing you thought of doing when there was a fire is to take a photo, especially at that early time. But the bucket brigade was actually, and I see this over and over in the different write-ups about fires in the different communities early on, the bucket was the most effective tool by far to stand in line and just hand the water over. And I just can't imagine having much hope, and the fact that, you know, these pumps were so inefficient. I think in one story they talk about that they're pumping away, and the person, the foreman who is handling the nozzle with the end of the hose could put his thumb over it and stop the water. So a big part of putting out fires is the pressure of the water, and they did not have that then. So the bucket it was. So a lot of other things, thankfully, have changed in advance. Hoses, for example, started out, they experimented with a lot of different things before they had rubber. And it seems that leather, which this bucket is made out of a tough leather, and which is probably why it's still here today. It's not wood. So these would have been the standard kind of fire buckets that would have been used, that would have hooked on below the ladder truck and used in the brigades. But leather was pretty common. This hat here, I can show you, this one is actually from Hutchinson. And you can't tell because it's spray painted gold, but it is a all leather hat except for this little metal eagle decorative piece. And it was worn by D. Hutchinson and presented to him in 1884 for his long service on the Hook and Ladder Company. And he was the foreman and also was the secretary for, the first secretary actually. And his fire department, the Hutchinson Fire Department, presented this to him on his retirement. But although it is very decorative, it's very fancy, this is not what they would have worn for dress up. This would have actually been worn for fires. And it's in many of the minutes where they approve purchasing more leather buckets, more leather caps, and things like that. Leather was a predominant fabric that was used in firefighting early on. Well, once they developed rubber, of course, everything changed, and plastics. So thank goodness, this is from the Plato Fire Department, and we've been so lucky. We have some things on loan at the Historical Society right now from each of the different fire departments. Now, some things will go away. We don't get to keep them. I wish they'd give everything to us, but that's okay. They have to have stuff for their collection too. But you'll see some really unique, cool stuff. So you'll want to check out the display because it's only going to be around for the year. But luckily, you know, they have this new equipment and all of the coats and the personal devices for all of the firemen to wear. And so it's really, really amazing to me going from this in the late 1890s, 1900s to this. And actually, this is quite old too. That's why they gave it to us. And, you know, there's even more advancements in equipment today. But thank goodness it's gotten a lot better. And, you know, this isn't the only thing that's changed as far as the hoses and the equipment and the engines and all of those things. Just the way that they dress has changed a lot too. So you can see behind me in the display here, Over here on that side, there is some military style looking uniforms. Well, these uniforms were typically what they would wear for special occasions and events. Of course, they wouldn't be fighting fire in them, but they have relaxed as well. And instead of the all wool double-breasted coats that we have here with the cap, which would have been worn, you see them moving to just ties and white shirts and maybe a blazer and nice slacks, all the way to our lovely Brownton Fire Department red t-shirt. So it's not just the equipment that has changed, also the regalia and things that they wore for dress uniforms. Like I said before, they, all wool, three-piece suits, double-breasted, compared to everything like t-shirts that they wear today a lot of times for fundraisers and stuff. The things that they wore to decorate their suits have changed. This is quite a decorative piece that was worn. It's from the Silver Lake Fire Department. This would have been worn by someone who was on Hose Company number 1, and that was pretty typical. People were assigned to certain equipment, and they trained with their group so that they knew how to use that equipment when it was time. And the most interesting thing that I find about this piece is if you turn it around, it is double-sided, and this side can be worn during funerals. So it's all black. Traditionally accustomed to, in mourning, for a period of time, if someone from the fire department has passed away, whether in the line of duty or not, they could flip theirs around and show some respect for their fallen brother with this all black, and it even says in memory. So kind of a neat piece that shows just how elaborate these uniforms used to be. Now, for today, we have a lot of badges. So fire chiefs and foremen wearing badges. This particular one is from Glencoe Fire Department, and it has the little GFD that you could wear on your nice crisp white shirt or navy blazer, which is a kind of a decorative piece similar to, but not quite as elaborate as the ribbons that would be worn. Now, back to a little bit about Lester Prairie and the formation of these early fire departments. So some unique things. The Village Council in 1893 ordered a $25 annual stipend to the chief, who could keep the enthusiasm of firefighters, keep them trained, and keep them organized. And it's not just in Lester Prairie. I just pulled that one out as an example. You see that in a lot of the early fire departments. It was tough to keep these groups together because, of course, back to, we're humans, we get complacent. If there's no emergency, why take the time out of our busy schedule to train, to hold meetings? But then again, you see a large fire happen. It becomes very prevalent again why we need this. But the city councils did a lot of things like this $25 annual stipend to try to keep these groups together, keep the volunteers organized. It was not until 1896, though, when a $6,000 bond issued for a wood water tower and a tank passed, that the fire department was really, truly active and organized. And its membership shot up to 42 members, and they elected Henry Emmy as chief and B.M. Burfield as assistant chief. So the fire bandwagon kind of started rolling for them then. But there was other key things that happened in Lester Prairie and many of the other communities that also helped to organize and keep volunteer firefighters together. So there's a transition from just focusing on fighting fires, purchasing equipment, and training with that equipment to almost becoming public servants, becoming a part of the community. You see in a lot of them where they take on responsibilities like the 4th of July celebration, working with the fireworks, Makes perfect sense, right? They still do, a lot of them do it today. But they also did other things that we don't have today. They formed firefighter bands, and they would perform. It became a good fundraiser for them as well. And here's a picture I love of the Lester Prairie Fire Department Band. And again, look at those uniforms. Outstanding. And all of the instruments that they played, and they would do annual performances, but they would also perform at town celebrations and other kind of activities. Well, the guys had to get together to practice, right? They formed bonds, they kept together. They then, of course, would do firefighter meetings as well, and it kind of made more of a cohesive community group that when they weren't fighting a fire, they still stayed together and they had that unity that they needed to last. So, the department sponsored in Lester Prairie the successful 4th of July celebration. It continued to inspire public spirit with picnics, card parties, dances, and I'm sure all these firemen's balls that were so popular for many, many years and that some still do today grew out of these early bands that would throw dances. And for a number of years with the sponsorship of a concert band. So this is something that not just Lester Prairie, but many communities adopted. By 1916, the fire department was incorporated and the Firemen's Relief Association was established. So this is something also you see in many of the small community and rural fire departments in McLeod County and all over Minnesota. They became formalized first within their own communities, then they decided to form actual Firemen's Relief Association. And the Relief Association was put in place to offer some benefits and help for firefighters, which was another thing. You know, if you're taking a huge amount of risk of your own life to be able to go out there and help your neighbors. And so having a relief association and belonging, that really, you know, helped when you got injured or if something happened, or if God forbid someone, you know, died actually in a fire. This would grow and become not only a state relief association, but then on a national level. And we'll talk more about that maybe at our next Spotlight on the Collection. But for now, what I want to do is encourage you to come see all of these items and many, many more like we have here in our display at the McLeod County Historical Museum. We're open on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 10 to 4, and Saturdays 1 to 4. But the McLeod County Fair, August 17th, it's coming. We are going to have a huge display like we always do at the fair. We'll have all of our firefighter gear loaned or that belongs to the museum on display. Giant pieces like the hand-pulled fire wagons, and I think we got a picture, or hose wagon I should say, back here, and a lot of different antique equipment that is just, you know, amazing to look at because you think of where this is where we started and where we are today. We're also really fortunate. We have a giant fire truck from 1953. It's an International, and that'll be on loan from Jim Pesic. He actually has his own personal collection of all things Stewart, and that truck was actually used by the Stewart Fire Department for many, many years. So we'll be taking pictures and downloading those onto our Facebook page. And one of the funnest things that we'll be doing at the McLeod County Fair involves this little bucket right here. So we are going to put out some people's fire. Now I know you've all probably heard of the Ice Bucket Challenge, right? Yes. Well, we are doing our own version. It's the Fire Bucket Challenge. And we're going to recruit some brave souls to be under this suspended fire bucket filled with water. And if they don't raise funds for the museum to help us out, we're going to put out their fire. So you'll be sure to come down and at least, you know, tease them a little bit, but hopefully make a donation so that they don't have their fire put out. So we invite everyone to please join us down at the McLeod County Fair. Our booth's in the commercial building, and we'll see you at the fair or at the museum. Thanks.